Hello, everybody. This is Kirsten Leekman, and I'm the host of the Conscious Business Blueprint. And today we have a very fascinating subject on deck, and that is conscious leadership. So, as you all know, we are looking at the A to Z on how to build and lead a conscious, or you can put values-driven, purpose-driven, sustainable organization of what I call the 21st century to make this massive shift towards a new way of operating in the world. And so we're looking at all kinds of domains of business, and leadership really is on the docket right now. And so I am super excited to have our guest on today. His name's John Renesch. And he is an author, a very prolific author, I might say. And he is a futurist and a mentor and advisor, and just a lovely, lovely person. We've had incredible conversations, and I'm really thrilled to have him. He's just one of those wise souls that really is here to serve humanity. And so it's just an honor, John, to have you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and your thoughts with our audience. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Kirsten. Am I blushing? I mean, I feel like I probably am beet red now after that introduction, so thank you for that.
It becomes you well. So why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself to the audience a little bit. Just tell them what has brought you to this moment in time and this passion that you're expressing.
Yeah, this passion has been alive and well in me for 40-something years, a long time. I grew up, I became an entrepreneur at the age of 18, way before I knew what an entrepreneur was, but I started my first business when I was 18. I started a series of businesses between there and 35. It was basically just, oh, I got an idea, nobody's doing it, I'll do it, and have fun with it. I never went to MBA school, so I didn't learn how to start a company and sell it. I didn't learn how to start a company and hire somebody else to manage it. So every time I lost interest in that particular project, it went away and I started something else. Around mid-30s, I had a midlife crisis. And I went into this malaise, which silly as it sounds now, that I thought everything that was really fun I had done, which is crazy. But I was in that for a while, and my business partner, who was also an attorney, had gone off to work with Werner Erhard at the very beginning of EST, the EST Human Potential Movement, basically in the early 70s. And eventually I found my way in this malaise I was in. I thought, well, what the hell, I'll even try this EST crap. And I went off and did the EST training, and it started opening up things for me. I did a lot of human potential stuff. So I became basically, I wouldn't say a devotee, but I really got turned on by the human potential movement and realized that tomorrow does not have to be the same as yesterday. And I did that with a lot of enthusiasm and so forth. So I ended up setting some goals. One of the goals was to get financially independent. So I started a real estate company with some friends. I also wanted to do something in the world. So I'd met Peter Senge and Willis Harman about the same time, and decided I wanted to really do something that benefited the world, not just was fun for me.
Right.
And that was the beginning to me of getting into this work, into the work I'm doing now. It came somewhere in the late 70s where I became aware that human beings could be doing a whole lot better than they're doing, both in how they relate to one another and how they relate to the planet. And I might be able to help do something about that. At that particular time, which most people probably listening to this probably can't relate to, but there was a thing called the arms race. And the Soviet Union and the US were going through this insane buildup of nuclear weaponry. And I thought, you know, why can't a business guy like me just come in and say, stop that, and come up with a way to end it? And Peter Senge introduced me to the idea of systems and systems thinking. So it seemed like we just needed to fix the system. So I was audacious enough with my human potential buildup, saying, I'm going to go out and I and others, but mainly me, we're going to stop the arms race. So with that kind of arrogance, I started the real estate company. I started a foundation, and anyway, got into doing global work at that point in time. The real estate company, we ended up in divorce court, which was a real slap down for my arrogance, and I got humbled very quickly. And at that point said, if I'm going to start a company, why not start a company that does good rather than starting a company that makes money and then takes some of that money and does good with it, which is I call the robber baron model. And why not have a company that actually does good, a conscious business? So I started New Leaders Press. We published a number of anthologies. I think all in all, I counted one time, we published about 300 authors, most of them first-time authors. Put together some great books, collections. There still is, even though they're now 20 years old, they're as current today in terms of what their contribution is as they were back then. But there's books on leadership, on a book written by all women, books on soul and business, books on spirituality and business, diversity, etc. So we put out some pretty good literature. Unfortunately, the company didn't survive, and we went through bankruptcy in '97. And since then, I've been basically on my own. I haven't had a company. I haven't had a thing in front of me, any kind of corporate name in front of me, until a few years ago, a couple of years ago, we formed FutureShapers. And I formed it with a partner of mine, Tom Eddington. And with the FutureShapers idea is to put executive peer groups together, similar to what Vistage or what they used to call tech does, except rather than just getting together to become better managers, everybody's coming together to become more conscious as a leader. So the goal is conscious leadership. And under one name or another, I've been writing about conscious leadership probably for 25 years, something on that order. I don't necessarily agree with the synonyms the synonyms you're using in the beginning. It isn't the same as authentic leadership. It isn't the same as purpose-driven leadership. It's got all those qualities to it. To me, that when you talk about consciousness, which is hard to talk about because it's ineffable, it's impossible to define it exactly. But we're talking about being a really good leader, but also having the consciousness that you must have if you're going to really examine yourself, if you're going to be self-aware. And that makes you more aware of the connectivity of everything. In fact, you can actually get to the state of recognizing you're in this field of unity where you're all one. And that's not something that leaders talk about a whole lot, about being in that field.
Right.
But there are people that have experienced that and recognize we're not just interconnected, we're actually one. Interconnected still suggests a separateness and that we're just related, but when you say unity, we're out of the non-duality into the non-duality paradigm. That's a whole different ballgame. And that's when you say that person over there is part of me. And whether they're my enemy, whether they're ISIS or Donald Trump or whoever you want to call as a personality that you may or may not agree with, they're still part of you. And that's getting to a pretty high level of self-awareness.
Right.
At that point.
Right.
So I think that's enough introduction about me. So I'm definitely curious about what you want to ask and how I can be of service on this call.
Yeah, so I think where I want to go first is just into the future, and then we'll cycle back to this whole notion of what does it mean to be a conscious leader. But I want to just sort of meander the field a little bit right now and really look at, you know, the why is this so important right now that we start considering conscious leadership, conscious business, you know, that we really make a concerted effort to move into that direction. And so let's look at, since you're a futurist, let's just look into what is it that you're seeing coming that is making this such a compelling argument?
Well, one thing that I've been seeing for the last number of years is how all of the human-made systems that we've created, healthcare system, educational system, political governance systems, etc., all are collapsing. They're all becoming outmoded. They were outmoded 20 years ago. They're becoming even more outmoded, and more people are becoming aware of their outmodedness, although people wouldn't use that terminology. They just know that things seem to be in gridlock. We can't get anything done anymore. So one is our systems are failing us. The systems that we created to serve us are now, in some cases, our masters. We've become slaves to some of those systems. So the systems are crumbling, and they're going to keep crumbling until we come up with better systems. I don't think we can fix the existing systems. They were created in a different time with a different set of assumptions, and we were in a different paradigm back then. The good news part of that is that there's more and more individuals who are kind of waking up, but those are very much on an individual level, and so the media attention and most of what we see is around the crumbling, the things that are falling apart. Never, needless to say, also the media loves the negative stuff, so they're focused on the negative stuff, which is the crumbling of the systems, the dysfunction, you might say. Whereas all of the percolation of consciousness amongst individuals all around the world, most of whom you don't even know, you never even heard their name, but they're waking up to something and saying, we can see there's something better on the horizon. We want to do that. We want to create that. We want better systems. We want to do better for our kids and our grandkids. So we have on one hand things falling apart, and on the other hand something new being born. And as my friend Lynn Twist liked to refer to it, is we have to hospice the old. It served us well for many years. So we need to treat it as hospice, not as bad, wrong, go away, but you really served us well, and let them die gradually and with respect. And also midwife this new thing that wants to be born, this new set of values, this new set of assumptions, this new set of explaining how things are, what we like to refer to in academia as the new paradigm, and let that come forth. And part of that paradigm could very well be the unity consciousness that we're talking about.
So, you know, I saw in one of your blogs, write-ups, articles about, you know, this notion of resistance to change. So yes, there is a real strong driving force towards this change that we're doing, but there is also an inherent resistance to actually going into that change. How do you actually address that? And especially address it as an entrepreneur, a business person, and then within the context of a company?
The biggest problem that my consultant friends, because probably 80% of my friends are consultants, and most of them in the transformation area or OD, with organizational development realm, what most of them, the situation most of them find into is they get hired by somebody, and it's usually the CEO of the company, and say, things really are out of whack here, we need to fix it, so fix the system. But I don't need to change.
Right.
The assumption that the problem is out there, not here. So I would say to that, if the system needs fixing and you are part of the system, you need fixing too. So if a CEO says, go fix my team, and they check out of the process, you're pretty much doomed to failure right there in terms of long-term transformation. So unless the person that is leading the team is willing to see that they are part of the system, and therefore they might be part of the problem, they usually are, but they might be, and they can admit that, then you've got a huge advantage in able to maybe perhaps have real transformation occur. Otherwise, you're just getting well paid to do some work, and you go back to that company a year later and things will be just the way they are now. It's just a total waste of time and money.
And are there any methodologies to help somebody actually make the shift? I mean, you know, I hear that a lot. It's like, okay, the person at the top just says, you know, you all change and I'm happy up here. But there's got to be something in systems theory and something where there's a key component of the system can be moved to shift or not. Is there something to be done?
Part of it, Kirsten, can just be simply informing them that they are part of the system, because most of them don't see themselves as part of the system. They see their reports and the organization down there, if they're the CEO or if they're in charge of whatever the group is, but they see themselves kind of above it. And they're recognizing the problem, so they see it as a problem over there. Again, that's part of that duality consciousness. That's not part of me. But when you remind them, this system that you want to fix, who's part of it? Well, them and them and them and them and them, and what about you? Well, I guess I am, Well, if you are part of the system and you're the boss, you're probably a pretty influential part of the system, and therefore you, more than anybody, needs to do some real soul searching and looking at what you're contributing to the dysfunction that you're trying to fix. And in most cases, everybody in the system has to go through some kind of soul retching, some kind of shifting themselves, which is very uncomfortable for everybody. We know the change is uncomfortable. I've done this way all my life, and suddenly you're asking me to do something like over here. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm used to doing this. And I got things figured out. I don't want to start something new. I've been in business 20 years. I don't want to be changing my spots, so to speak. So and when you have the person in charge recognizing that they could be part of the problem and probably are part of the problem, and they accept that willingness to go through and turn themselves a little bit inside out themselves, then you got a decent shot of having long-lasting, true transformation.
Okay.
And that's what I mean by conscious leadership, is that it's not just that person, that CEO or that person at the top. It's conscious leadership comes from everybody. Conscious leadership, to me, the way I define it, it doesn't rely on a title or a position. It comes from seeing something that needs to be changed, seeing something that needs to be fixed, and going ahead and fixing it, not waiting for somebody to say, that's your responsibility, or you now have a new job title, so you go do that. It's like wherever you see something wrong, you fix it. When you see something out of whack, you blow the whistle on it.
Right. But doesn't that need to be embedded into the organization as a culture?
Well, when I write about conscious organizations, that's the vision of a conscious organization, where you have a culture where anything that's dysfunctional, anything that's shadow-like that goes on in that organization, it's like wanted to blow the whistle on it, as opposed to the way most corporations are now, where it's like, oh, you're doing that? Okay, well, I won't blow the whistle on you, but I'm going to be doing this over here, so don't blow the whistle on me. And it's all these little agreements that we're not going to tell on each other. So what happens is you end up with this whole lot of dysfunction going on, or what I call bureaucracy.
Right.
And if you want to get an organization that really wants to be a top performer, you've got to get rid of all that crap. And say it's okay to blow the whistle on it. We'll have an intervention party. If you see something going on, and say people see lying going on in sales, for instance, and the people that are delivering the product realize that their salesman exaggerated the product, the benefits of the product, they can either go back to sales and say, you got to fix this, or they can go to the CEO and say, sales is misrepresenting our product and they're over-promising, we can't deliver that. Those kinds of things. And you end up with an organization that's literally happy to have an intervention because they become more conscious as a result of that.
Do you generally find that if you bring in that kind of a culture, that those that are not willing to change, that those that are willing, that want to stay in their egos and their drama and their little fiefdoms, they spin themselves out? Do you find that there is a self-correcting mechanism that starts functioning in an organization like that?
One of the things that an organization has to be willing to risk when they really truly want to go through a transformation, when they really step up and say, yes, we want to transform ourselves, is they may lose some people. And they may lose some people they've come to depend on. And the people they lose will tend to be people that don't want to give up the way they're doing things. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, they have to be fired. They have to be let go because they won't go along with the change, but they also don't want to lose their job. If they happen to have another job waiting, they may decide to, that's the time to shift. But if they're into fear, which most people are that are working, they don't want to leave that job, so they're going to hold on, dig in their heels, and be an obstruction for the whole process. And in that case, they may have to be talked to, counseled, or eventually even let go.
Right, right. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what makes up a conscious leader. What are like the essential characteristics that you've found for a conscious leader to be effective as a leader, as a visionary, as a culture holder of an organization?
Well, first they have to know the basic tenets of good leadership. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to overlook that. So they have to have the skills of being a leader. Mm-hmm. And there's tons and tons of books about how to do that. So that's not where we focus a lot, or where I focus a lot of my writing. The consciousness is pretty much the new stuff on the block. So what does it mean to be conscious as a leader, or be conscious as a worker in an organization? And that starts with having a very intimate knowledge of yourself and what makes you tick and what motivates you, what your quirks are, what's in your shadow, because we all have shadows. So what are you hiding from the rest of the world? What are you keeping hidden from the rest of the world? Where do you get plugged in? When someone says something and you suddenly go off on a tangent. But those are all parts of getting to know yourself very intimately. And part of any kind of self-reflection program requires a practice of some sort. So meditation is probably the most popular practice, but it could be a yoga practice, it could be a martial arts practice, but some sort of practice that takes you out of yourself, that puts you in deep contact with your soul, so to speak. But it takes you out of your head, out of your mind, out of your compulsive monkey mind, as we like to call it, that chews on stuff forever. So having a practice is really important. So a lot of times consultants will come in, do a program, and let's say it even does have a transformational element, and the company does take a major shift, and people start having more fun, they're getting better results, they're getting higher engagement. And then because the consultant is now gone, or the coaching is now gone, it kind of goes back into and falls back into the old practices, because it's old habits die hard, as we know. So unless there's some practice, whether they come back to have a retreat every month or 2 months or 3 months, or they have a meditation practice, or they have some kind of coaching that comes in on a regular basis for perhaps as long as a year. So they shift that habit from the way they used to do things to the way they're now doing things. And then the program has a decent chance of surviving and thriving, and the company being truly transformed.
Okay. One of the aspects that seems to be absolutely essential is the ability to envision the unvisioned yet. That whole notion that in order to create, we can't solve our problems with the same mindset as we did before. And so speak more into a leader's ability, a conscious leader's ability to help bring forth the new that hasn't been visioned yet, mm-hmm. In order to create this new structure we're looking at.
Yeah, that to me, that the vision would be part of being a leader. One of the big distinctions that I don't hear much of anymore, but it was popularized by Max Dupree, my God, way back in, he was the CEO of Herman Miller Furniture, and years ago, he's retired. He might even be dead now, I don't know. But he made a distinction between management and leadership. And most leaders come up through the ranks of management, and they're thinking that when all they know is management, and they're put in a position of leadership because they've kind of ascended the ladder. And leadership is a whole different quality than management. And the distinction that Dupree made is that leadership is an art, whereas management is a science. Management is coming up with a way of getting things done better and then keeping that machine well-oiled and keeping it going, so you keep cranking out whatever you're cranking out, widgets or services or whatever. It's scientifically, it's mechanistic. You learn the best system to get it done and you do it. But leadership is coming from the place of a poet or an artist. And when you're in that leadership position, one of your biggest skills is declaring the vision and holding that vision. Basically, once that vision is clear, whether it's done by a team or yourself or whatever, but then holding that vision. And you say, well, what does that entail in terms of work? Well, it isn't particularly physical work to hold the vision. It's like holding that space, but you know whenever the company is getting away from it. So you're basically, in one sense, you're a morale officer in an organization. Keeping everybody focused on the vision, so they keep that vision in mind all the time. They're doing all this other stuff down here. So while they're doing the mechanical work and they're doing the scientific stuff, they still have this vision that they're holding, and they're all in line with that vision. They're all in line behind that vision. Right. So even though one person's working on this thing and one person's working on that thing, they're all going to the same place. And the leader's job, whether they're a conscious leader or not, any leader's job is to keep that focus alive, so that people keep going back to that vision, because that's what pulls them into the future.
Right. And, we talked about Frederic Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations, and how to get the teams themselves more creative in their operation and more collaborative. Speak into that a little bit of, how it filters down into how the organization actually can function on a more conscious level.
Well, I think if you invite greater participation by more people, you're going to get better engagement by your coworkers. And if you allow them to be creative and use their creativity, encourage their creativity, and so they end up feeling contributory, they feel alive, they feel more engaged, they feel more they feel their work is more meaningful, they feel they have more responsibility for the outcome. Now you've got an organization that's cooking. That's when it's good. Everybody loves working there. People want to work there that don't work there, so you don't have a whole lot of problem keeping the throughput going as far as employment people. Creativity is somebody once said creativity is close to God. So when somebody is really being creative, they're getting into that consciousness, that level of consciousness, where it isn't like I'm got somebody's idea, or I'm not being clever. I'm not taking an idea I saw over here and translating it into my situation and adapting it. I'm actually literally coming from some place that hasn't been come from before.
Right.
And that's a very, I'm going to call it spiritual place. You're actually, something is coming down through you and you're acting like a channel for it. That to me is real creativity. That's not the cleverness or the adaptation way that a lot of people think of creativity. It's when I think of the movie August Rush. I don't know. It wasn't a box office hit, but this young boy is the product of a musician, husband and wife, a woman. No, they weren't husband and wife. That was part of the problem. This man and woman got together. They had a baby. He ended up in an orphanage, and he comes out of the orphanage looking for his mother and his father. But he wanders through New York, and he's hearing the subway, and he's hearing the trams and all that. And out of that music, out of that all that racket that we think of as noise, he's getting a rhythm, and he ends up becoming a composer at the age of 8 or 9 years old. Wow. And he ends up, the last scene is he's conducting an orchestra in New York City, and his mother and his father both come and hear about him and think maybe there's a connection, so they end up meeting again. It's a very nice, ending. But this kid's name, he's named by the comedian that killed himself, Robin Williams, plays this really nasty guy, and he's taken this kid under his wing, and he wants to give him a name, and a truck goes by, and It's like the August Rush sale for some mattress or something like that. And he decides that's your name, August Rush. Anyway, this movie, which I highly recommend, to me, it demonstrates in a very dramatic way how you can you get it from someplace, not necessarily from God, but you get it from someplace out there, and it comes down through you, and somehow this young man created music out of all this racket and noise he was hearing. Mm-hmm. And I was crying in that process, because I'd never seen such a powerful demonstration of what real creativity is about.
No, that's so lovely. And really, I mean, what I'm hearing you speak to is this ability, or this invitation to quiet what's up here, to become present, and to tap into the intuitive. You know, we make actually in our work a distinction between brain, which is the thing in here, and mind, which is more the intuitive, the knowingness. So we make actually that distinction, and it's basically quieting the brain to access the mind. And from there, the brilliance of the solutions can come. And it is powerful. It is a sweet space to be in, really is. I was really curious. You, in one of your writings, you speak to this difference between, you know, this interest that has been out there in conscious leadership, and those that actually sink into real commitment, and the difference of that, you know, and I believe, I forget the gal's name, but it's like it's a lifestyle. It's how you live. And that's the difference. So speak into because it's subtle. You know, I think a lot of people don't really understand quite the difference. It's like, oh yeah, I'm interested, I want to do that, versus I am committed, I am doing this. And that really subtle difference is really important to understand. So really speak into that.
Yeah, I got Google alerts about 4 or 5 years ago, because I was getting tired of just searching on even Ask Jeeves before Google about conscious leadership. And basically, the only thing I was coming up with when I would do these searches was all the conscious leadership references were to some article I wrote. And I wasn't doing it as a fluffing my own ego. I was looking to see who else is coming into the field. And occasionally I'd find somebody new and all that. So finally Google comes through with this alerts thing. So I put this term conscious leadership into my Google alerts. And I have watched that go from 2 or 3 hits a month to sometimes 2 or 3 a day. And sometimes one of those 2 or 3 a day has 3 or 4 others in it. And some of them are just, the words happen to get together, like socially conscious or something like that. But occasionally I'm coming across somebody that's actually talking about conscious leadership. And I check them out, and I'm looking for the real deal people. And some of the people are riding the wave of popularity, because the term is getting to be kind of popular.
Yeah.
But I'm also looking, and I'm probably having 2 or 3 conversations a week with people that I've never met, mostly younger, because as you get older, that's what happens. It's mostly younger. And to my initial discretion, I'd say they're pretty much the real deal. But even though they might be the real deal, there's a lot of people that are very interested in reading about conscious leadership. There's a lot of people interested in talking about being in conversations about conscious leadership. There are even people that are very interested in writing about conscious leadership. But living conscious leadership is still fairly scarce. So we have a lot of interest now, a lot more interest, probably exponentially 5 to 10 times more than it was for most of the last 20 years, in my view. But we haven't seen a lot of conscious leadership show up as leadership. We still have a leadership crisis in the world because there's not enough conscious leaders around that are showing up. And it was Diana Chapman was the woman that you were trying to think of. And Tom, my partner, and I were having a conversation with her a couple of months ago. And she just very threw something, and this happens a lot. Some people just throw out a phrase, and one person goes, "My God, what did you just say?" And the person who said it doesn't know, I don't know. But she said something like conscious leadership was a lifestyle. And that hit me so hard, I ended up writing a piece about it, which I guess is what you read. But changing your lifestyle is different than knowing how to talk about conscious leadership. having a lifestyle change and becoming a conscious leader is closer to deciding to join the clergy as a layman, which is a pretty big deal, or say choosing to have a family when you're a bachelor and not having children, because having children is a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a pretty big deal kind of thing to commit to being a conscious leader, because you can't commit to being a conscious leader without becoming a conscious person. And as you become a conscious person, that means you're a conscious husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, father, etc., son. But you become a conscious person.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I happen to lead in this particular area, so I'm a conscious leader too.
Right.
But you don't say I'm a conscious leader at work and then go home and, flip off your wife or whatever. It's just when you become conscious, you become conscious, and the whole person becomes conscious.
Yeah.
And it is a major, major commitment, and quite frankly, it's a whole lot of work.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just aren't up for it.
Yeah, the word that I probably would use for that is embodied. Embodied leadership.
Embodied is an academic term that a lot of people don't understand, but yes, that's accurate.
And the non-academic term could be grokking. Remember that? Stranger in a Strange Land? Grokking was...
Well, I use the term grokking a lot. I grok books a lot. But my idea of grokking a book is I'll kind of like do that and check it out and say, okay, I got it. I got, there's nothing really new in it, but I grokked it.
Yeah.
There's a time when I had to do that for about 20 or 30 books a month, and I wasn't about to read 20 or 30 books a month.
Oh my.
Anyway, I'm loving the conversation, by the way, Kirsten.
Cool. I am too.
Yeah.
So, we're now in the area that I love subtleties. I love, to me, it's in the subtleties where the rubber hits the road. And so the other thing that caught my eye in your writings was about allowing the imperfections, So as we make this change to a different way of being, this consciousness, it is okay to, as you said, show our cracks, show our failings, and through that transformation, then through these imperfections, we then get to go through to the other side and not try to make this like a perfect path. So, I think I'd like you to speak into that a little bit to give people sort of a little bit of breathing room as we go through this transition.
Well, it's in a way a reminder that we are inventing as we're going.
Yes.
It might be similar to the wagon trains coming across the United States. They did a lot of things to get across, and the wagons didn't hold up perfectly, and everybody wasn't perfect. My great-grandfather, for instance, he and another buddy of his, they started with 4 oxen and a 4-wheeled wagon. They got to California with 2 oxen and a 2-wheeled wagon.
Oh my God.
They ate the oxen or they died along the way, and they had to modify the wagon because they used less. They needed less and less, and they probably broke a few axles along the way.
Wow.
But when you are in the process of creating something new, and there will be a day, I hope, I really do hope, there'll be a day when we don't talk about conscious leadership. It'll just be leadership.
Yes.
But we're in this transition. We're in this bardo now, this liminal space, as a friend of mine likes to call it, where we're in that transition. And when you're in the transition, you come up with all kinds of chewing gum and baling wire ways of doing things that become sophisticated and polished and all that down the road, but they aren't right now. We're inventing it for the first time. Leonard Cohen, in one of his songs, I think it's the anthem, talks about, there's a line where the crack is how the light gets in.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always liked that line because a bell doesn't have any light coming in unless there's a crack in it, and that's how the light gets through. So a lot of times it's in the cracks, it's in the imperfections that we learn. It's through the imperfections and cracks that we get inspired, because sometimes if we tend to be too perfectionistic, we can get very down and out and demoralized. In that demoralization, we might end up getting some God moments, you know, some really inspiring or highly intuitive responses that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise if everything had gone just the way we thought it was supposed to go.
Right, right. All right, this is the last question right now, even though I could go on. But you said that you hold that commerce is the key to bringing about global human consciousness. And I was really curious about that because that, yeah, would you speak to that?
Hearing that, and I know that's in my bio on the website, and I keep thinking, like, it seems so outmoded. I said that back when I put the website up in the very first place, which was one of the, I don't know, when websites when we started doing websites, 15 years ago, something like that. But my friend John Perkins has come up with another word for it, which is corporatocracy. And the model I was using is, my friend Willis Harman used to say, business is like the locomotive pulling the train of society. So wherever the locomotive goes, the train follows, which was a kind of a nice way of saying business is running the world. But John Perkins has now written extensively about how corporations are really running the world and has evidence for it, and his experience as an economic hitman in 20 and 30 years ago is evidence of that, and how much corporations are driving foreign policy, how much corporations are driving the values of the world, media, that control the media. They control, well, I was going to say everything but the church, but who knows, maybe they control the church too. But corporations are running the world. It's not when they're ruling the world, they have been ruling the world for some time. So what John calls that is a corporatocracy. It's not a democracy. There's a website, there's a video on our website by the former Minister of Finance of Greece. And he talks about how the current form of capitalism is killing democracy. And I put him in touch with John Perkins and found out that they already know each other. In fact, he's even written a blurb for John's new book, the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So if business doesn't change, if the corporations don't become more conscious, in my terminology, we're going to end up being run by the corporations, and with not only corporations, but corporations that are not particularly conscious, so that the corporation's agenda is maximize profits in the shortest period of time. And if you keep maximizing profits in the shortest period of time, the gap between the haves and the have-nots continues to increase. And eventually you're going to have very few people that have a lot and a whole lot of people that don't have as much, and there's going to be a revolution. I mean, you can't have that tension go on ad infinitum. I mean, there's eventually they can only circle so many wagons around all their stuff and hire so many armies to guard them, but eventually 7 billion versus, you know, 500,000 or whatever the number is, there's going to be, you know, revolution. I mean, the revolution really, I mean, like bang, bang, and all that kind of stuff, boom, boom. I'd rather we have a revolution of the spirit, a revolution of our thinking now, and go through the pain and agony that that's going to entail. Because when you have a shift in thinking, and a lot of us have been talking about shifting paradigms for quite some time, and somehow it eludes us that it might affect our lifestyle. And suddenly it's like, wait a minute, my 401k plan just went bankrupt because, you know, or I'm going to lose my house now, or I can't make that tax deduction. You know, it's going to affect everybody. And that's better than having people shooting each other and blowing up bombs on each other and doing suicide, terrorism, and all that. But if we don't get this gap, this increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots mitigated at some point in time, we're going to have a big, 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 big problem.
Mm-hmm. So you're not really saying that commerce will ultimately be the one that will help make the shift, but that it is key to making the shift overall, ultimately.
If corporations, or commerce, as I used to call it, if corporations don't shift,
yeah,
we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So that's one reason I focus so much on business transformation, organizational transformation, corporate transformation, and most of the leadership is in the corporate world.
Right. Right. All right, we are out of time, unfortunately. I too have really enjoyed this conversation. This is, to me, the meat of everything. Ooh, we're having music.
Yeah, I have a cell phone that nobody knows the number, but somebody finds a way to make it ring every once in a while. So I got my hand over it. That's the best I can do.
Well, you're bringing us music as we wrap up. So perfect timing.
There we go. Finally, it's off.
There you go. So thank you, John, so much for, sharing your time right now with the audience and, the stake in the ground that you've placed, to serve humanity and the earth right now. It's really deeply appreciated. Deeply appreciated.
Thank you, Kirsten. A pleasure to be here, and I hope this is of value to your viewers.
Yes, I am certain it is.
Great.
So thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, wherever you are. Good afternoon. And we will see you on the other side. Make sure you look for your email tomorrow and see what other goodies we have in store for you in the Conscious Business Blueprint. All right. Bye, everybody.